Good morning, student. Today we are going to discuss Economic Survey 2024. So, what are the major points that are to be noted from our exam point of view? Basically, for GS3 Economic Optional second paper as well as Indian Economic Survey for Indian Economic paper. Now, we will discuss every chapter in details one by one. First, now we are going to discuss the first chapters. First chapters is talking about the state of the economy, steady as she goes. What is the state of economy? So, in this paragraph, we have seen that the global economic scenario revealed or uh, global economy scenario of the global economy explained in this paragraph. So, here it is written that despite global uncertainties, adverse geopolitical development, the global economic registered at a growth of 3.2%. Global growth registered 3.2%. 3.2%. 3.2%. Despite global uncertainties, adverse geopolitical development, the global economy registered 3.2%. But very interestingly, this growth marginally lowered than 2022. What this growth was registered in 2023, which is marginally lower than the growth registered in 2022. But compared to the projection of the growth which is higher, projection हुआ था हम लोग का 2.8% projection. This is the projection figure by World Economic Outlook. So, as per World Economic Outlook, despite geopolitical tensions and global uncertainties, even global inflations, higher global inflations, so this growth, global growth registered as 3.2%, which was lower than 2022, which was to 3.2%, more than 2002. So, what we understand, but it is higher than the projected growth of 2.8%. 2.8% as per World Economic Outlook. Inflationary pressures, here talk about the inflationary pressure also. So, inflationary pressures have been significantly higher because on account of persistence of core inflations. Core inflation is there. What is core inflation? The term core inflation is known to all us. Core inflation means the inflation which is estimated by excluding the volatile items. This is the core inflation. So, these inflationary pressures have been significantly higher as because of the core inflation. Global trade moderated due to the risings. Global trade, again we need to understand here, global trade moderated due to the rising geopolitical tensions, cross-border restrictions, and slower the growth in advanced economics. These are the major reasons behind slower the trade. So, global trade moderated because of the rising geopolitical tensions, cross-border restrictions, as well as slower economic growth in advanced countries. These are the major reasons. Again, here talk about the economic shock. We already understood economic shock result from Russia-Ukraine conflict, and due to the conflict of Russia and Ukraine, economic growths had been arrested in major large economics like Germany and France. So, what we understand here, economic survey also mentioned the economic shocks resulting from Russia and Ukraine conflict had arrested economic growth of many large economics like German, France, etc. All this economy. Basically, especially we can see also here mentioned US faced high inflationary pressure. US faced high inflationary pressures, and consequently when there is high inflationary pressure, so what will be obviously the monetary policy? So policy rates substantially raise in USA. Due to the raising of policy rate, so investor become pessimistic, and that is why FDI becomes slow. So high inflationary pressures are realized in US due to these different geopolitical conflicts, and due to this region policy, from the monetary policy point of view, all the policy rates were raised to counter this global inflation. And this is why mostly investors become pessimistic to a larger extent, and hence FDI's flow becomes slowed. This is another important point that to be noted here. On fiscal front, if we see the fiscal front, talk about the fiscal front. Here fiscal front is also there. Fiscal front is there. What about the fiscal front? Global general government fiscal deficit rise as of GDP rose by 1.6%. That is global fiscal deficit. Global fiscal deficit rose to 1.6%, 1.6% points, which is almost large point as compare in 2023, and of 23 to 1.6% in 2023 in compare with 2022. If we compare the last year, this global fiscal deficit rose to 1.6%. This is another very great obstacles for global fiscal point of view. So declining revenues are why this phenomenon basically happened. Why this fiscal deficit rise? Reason is simple. Revenue declines mostly in oil producing country and goods exporting countries. This is the major reasons behind rising the fiscal deficit globally. Now, here is, and that is why USA raised the policy rate, but not all of the countries raised the policy rate. There are many countries who did not raise the policy rate to counter the pressure of inflations. Now come to this another point. This is the state economy again. Come to the next, domestic economy. What talk about domestic economy in economic survey? Domestic economy. Now we come to understand about the domestic economy. What about the domestic economy? Let's see. So, consolidation of union government. Before that, what is about the domestic economy? Yes, this one, domestic economy, a resilient domestic economy. What is about the domestic economy? Despite global uncertainties, global issue, external challenges, Indian GDP growth grew by 8.2%. Here, growth about domestic GDP, which was increased by 8.2%. 8.2% in financial year 24 in compare last financial year, in compare 2023 to last year. Because why this GDP growth, because why this such GDP growth risen consistently, the momentum in growth because become possible because focused on maintaining macroeconomic stability. This growth achieved because Indian macroeconomic stability. Here, macroeconomic stability. Macroeconomic stability. What is the macroeconomic stability here? So, behind this growth, there are two major components talk about here. One is consumption expenditure. Consumption expenditure. Consumption expenditure and government investment expenditure. Investment expenditure. So, basically these two major category of expenditures boosted in accelerating in GDP growth, which was to 8.2%. And that is why our strong macroeconomic stability enable in accelerating such type of economic growth in India, despite global shock and geopolitical tensions. Here also mention one thing, that this GDP growth, basically here this GDP growth, this one gross value-added growth is also mentioned here, plus net indirect tax, which would equal GDP. So already this is mentioned, gross value-added, which is the supply side measure of economic growth. Measure of economic growth. This is the supply side measure of economic growth, which was registered 7.2% in 2024, which is mentioned in this economic survey. This is another important point. The supply side measures of economic growth registers 7.2%, which is gross value added mentioned in this economic survey. And this GDP growth was registered 8.2% in financial year 24, which is a demand side measures of economic growth. This is the demand side measures of economic growth. Now, this net indirect tax, which is the adjustment of subsidies with tax collection, grew by 19.1%. So nothing, this net indirect tax is basically reflected by showing the difference between GDP and gross value added. So difference is 19.1%, which is net indirect tax, which is grew by 19.1%. This is the major fact that were revealed in this economic survey. That is, GDP growth registered 8.2% and gross value added registered 7.2%, which is the supply side measures already known, supply side measures of economic growth and this demand side measures of economic growth. So both consistently rising. Due to the rising both consistently, here the difference between these two variables, we also get that net indirect tax also risen by 19.1%. Now come to the consolidation of union government, fiscal consolidations. What talk about the fiscal consolidation? Fiscal consolidations of the government. We will talk about the fiscal consolidations. So fiscal consolidations, where is fiscal consolidations? Fiscal consolidations. Here another important point that we need to improving public finances, consolidations of union government. What talk about here? Actually against the global, already we have seen in respect of global economy, this fiscal deficit is of the mood of rising trending. That is, fiscal deficit widening, more and more widening and increasing the debt burden globally. In entire global scenario, what we see? This fiscal figure is rising, as well as debt burden also rising in respect of global economy. But India remained on the course of fiscal consolidations. But in case of Indian economy, against global economy, where rising trend of fiscal deficit, as well as public debt, India consistently remained on the course of fiscal consolidation, on the course of fiscal consolidations. How it become possible? That is, in such a situation where in global economy fiscal deficit rising as well as public debt rising, but in context of Indian economy, so government consistently remained on the course of fiscal consolidations. How it become? Reason behind these consolidations is strong macroeconomic stability. Here talk about government strong macroeconomic stability. Strong macroeconomic stability. How this stability reached? How this stability achieved? So, behind this consistently maintaining these fiscal consolidations, government maintained strong macroeconomic stability. As because this can be proved by seeing the fact that fiscal deficit brought down how much? Fiscal deficit brought down from 6.5%. Here mentioned here 6.5% in 2023 financial year. In 2023 financial year to from 6.4% to 5.6%. 5.6% in financial year 24. So this fact clearly shows the macroeconomic stability remain in Indian economy consistently. So what are the major reason behind this strong fiscal? How government achieve this fiscal deficit? Macroeconomic stability, strong macroeconomic stability. What are the major reasons? Actually, we can see from these documents. First thing, the strong growth in direct. First reason we can mention here. We can mention here, that is strong growth in direct and indirect tax collection. Growth in direct and indirect tax collection, which exceeded the conservative budgetary estimate. So what is the reason? This is the first reason we can mention here. Strong growth in direct and indirect tax collection, which exceeded the conservative budgetary estimate. This is the first reason. Second reason, additionally non-tax revenue in the form of dividend from RBI generated revenue receipts. So what is the second point we can mention here? Second point here mention non-tax revenue. Additionally non-tax revenue from where? Non-tax revenue in the form of dividends, from RBI. So this is an RBI which generated revenue receipt of the government. This is another important point that to be noted here. So second point, behind this strong macroeconomic policy, that is additionally non-tax revenue in the form of dividend from RBI, which generated revenue receipts of the government. This is the second most important that to be noted here. Third reason is that narrowing revenue deficit. Narrowing revenue deficit narrowing करते हुए widening the fiscal deficit. फिस्कल डिफिसिट को बढ़ाते हुए रेवेन्यू डिफिसिट नैरो किया गया, वाइडनिंग द फिस्कल डिफिसिट को बढ़ाते हुए बीइंग अकाउंटेड. ये क्यों हुआ? बेसिकली इज बीइंग अकाउंटेड. व्हाई इट वाज हैपेंड? फॉर बाय capital expenditures. Due to the rising of capital expenditure by the government, this fiscal deficit widened but by keeping the revenue deficit narrowing. So government ये revenue deficit कम क्या, fiscal deficit बढ़ाया, तो इसका मतलब the capital expenditure rise किया, which is a productive expenditure. So fiscal expenditure of the government become quality improvement. Quality improvement is here. So when we can understand it is a quality improvement is because this capital expenditure is happening here, and by this capital expenditure government is creating some capital assets which enable the economy to earn more in futures. This is another important point that to be noted behind strong macroeconomic stability. Fourth reason, next we will mention the fourth reason. We need to mention here fourth reasons. Reason number 4, well administered in tax collection. Well administered in tax collection, that cost of the collection, of taxes, of direct taxes declined from 0.66% of gross collection in financial year 2020 to 0.51 in financial year 23. So what we understand here? This efficient administration in tax collection basically was revealed in this report. So this is another most important reason behind strong macroeconomic policy of the Indian government. So this is well administered. So you can say number 5 reason we can mention here. Again, we can mention the reason number 5. So growth in gross revenue, growth in gross tax revenue was estimated, how much it was estimated? To be 13.4% in financial year 24. This is another reason. So another reason we can mention the reason number 5, 6, which is another important reasons, which is important to note here. Reason 6, which is this major momentum. We have seen major momentum where major momentum in non-debt capital receipt. What is non-debt capital receipt? Non-debt, that is the capital receipt which will not create the liabilities of the government. Say government if borrow, then it will create the liabilities of the government. But in this case, that is non-debt capital. It will not create the debt of the government. That is why it is termed as non-debt capital receipt. So this non-debt capital receipt, from which source it is coming? The proceeds. This proceeds is coming. The proceeds from the national monetization pipeline national monetization pipeline. National monetization pipeline. National monetization pipeline. This was declared in 2000 budgetary, declared, which was declared in budget 2022 financial year. So from this source, magnitude amount of proceeds was coming from non-debt capital receipt, proceeds from the national monetization pipeline. That is, government is monetizing some assets. By doing the assets, government received sizable amount of proceeds. So all are the major reasons. Sometimes questions may be framed from this area. What kind of questions or what type of question we can expect? We can expect here. So this type of questions may ask in our questions for GS paper 3, again optional economics, second paper, as well as Indian economic services. What questions we can expect here? What question we can expect here against the global trend? Against the global trend, against the global trend of widening, global trend of widening fiscal deficit, widening fiscal deficit and increasing debt burden, increasing debt burden, how India consistently maintaining fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidations discuss. So in such type of question we can expect from this year economic survey. So how we answer? What will be the answer design? So here we need to write, first of all, strong fiscal measures. Strong fiscal measures or policy that Government of India adopted. How we can say that strong fiscal? As because fiscal deficit brought down, which was 6.5% of GDP in 2023, and it had fallen to 5.6% of GDP in financial year 2024. This is the major reason. So apart from this, strong revenue collections, that is, strong revenue collection means direct and indirect tax collection, which basically become exceeded than the conservative budgetary estimates. It was exceeded the conservative budgetary estimate. Additionally, government become able to receive non-tax revenue in the form of dividend from RBI. So that is why this dividend accelerated revenue receipt of the government, no doubt here. Third most important point here we need to be mentioned in respect of this question, narrowing revenue deficit and widening fiscal deficit. That is, tapping up the revenue deficit and scaling up the fiscal deficit to some extent because of more capital expenditure. Obviously, this more capital expenditures enable the economy to produce more capital assets, which will generate more income in futures. Next important point that to be mentioned in respect of these questions, well administered in tax collection. That is, the cost of collection of taxes declined from 0.66% gross collection in financial year 2020 to 0.51% gross collection in financial year 2023. This is very important point that to be written in respect of these questions. And the growth in gross tax revenue, GTR, growth in tax revenue, which was estimated to be 13.4%. 13.4% in financial year 24. This is another reasons that mentioned. Again, non-tax revenue or non-debt capital receipt, non-debt capital receipt that government realized from which source? National monetization pipeline, which was declared in the budget session in 2022. In budget session in 2022, it was declared. So all are about the major points behind these fiscal consolidations of the government. Next, come to the next paragraph. So here we can see one thing. The government has followed a path of fiscal consolidation, no doubt. Government following the fiscal consolidations while again continuing to protect vulnerable section and investing the productive capacity. ऐसा नहीं है कि गवर्नमेंट अगर फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन कर रहा है इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि vulnerable section को इग्नोर किया. So government no doubt followed the fiscal consolidation, but at the same time government focusing on vulnerable section also, and at the same time investing in productive manner. And that is successive budget moderated the growth in revenue expenditure while achieving the compression. जहां पर compression था, achieving the compressions in revenue expenditure as % of GDP. The government also ensured that free good food grains provided 81.4 crore people in the country. So government is spending revenue expenditure, no doubt. At the same time, government boosting the capital expenditure also. At the same time, that is why share of the total expenditure allotted to capital spending were progressively enhanced. यह अगर किया गया जो कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर अगर बढ़ाया गया तो टोटल शेयर ऑफ द टोटल एक्सपेंडिचर, हियर वी सी expenditures allotted to capital spending were progressively enhanced and thereby improving the quality of expenditure. So that is why public expenditure quality improved. So we cannot say directly that government only spending on revenue expenditure. At the same time, government focusing on capital expenditure also. So no doubt there is a compressions in revenue expenditure, huge compression of revenue expenditure. As because government is mandated to provide the food grains, and government is providing the food grains 81.4 crore peoples. Again, another important fact here we can see, the allocation, in respect of allocation from central government to state government, how the allocation structure mentioned here, from central government to state government, and here you see the shares of agriculture, industry and service sector overall gross value added at current prices 17.7%, 27.6% and 54.7% respectively in financial year 2024. Okay, this all about.